I'm not a lawyer, but let's get into day 5 of the Karen retrial. I know, I'm behind, I know. So before the day starts, Karen's attorney tells the judge that over the weekend after firefighter McLaughlin testified, he got a bunch more pictures of Katie McLaughlin and Caitlin Albert together.
Since Katie McLaughlin testified Thursday and Friday, we received a deluge of photographs that put her with Caitlin Albert on many different occasions after they graduated high school. We received information from their high school yearbook that they were more than just acquaintances in high school. They were teammates on the track team. And even after I sent that email with the photographs that I attached to it, late last night we received another photo where Katie McLaughlin and Caitlin Albert are standing next to each other in a photo at a baby shower in June of 2021, about 8 months before John O'Keefe's death.
And then the first witness is called, whose name is Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, and he's with the Canton Police Department. He arrived to the scene, 34 Fairview Road, the morning that John O'Keefe was found, and he, along with another detective, used an interesting method to process the scene. And while they were processing it, they discovered something.
We decided we were going to process the scene with a leaf blower. At that time, Sergeant Good volunteered to go get a snow blower. What I told him in the meantime, I wanted to photograph the area, and you can see the very light pink spotting that we thought may be blood, and there was an object in the center. It was a broken clear cocktail glass. Detective Sergeant Lank is documenting, and Sergeant Good is also assisting. Well, I was removing the snow layer by layer. Right here, you can see it exposing the cocktail glass. We took 6 blood samples, yes. Well, blood samples, because they were frozen, we debated on how to collect it. We didn't think swabbing was going to be easy to do if it was frozen. So we decided on finding some type of temporary plastic evidence container. We were able to find large cups, and we took 6 samples. We bagged the 6 samples, and Sergeant Lank ordered them back to Canton Police Headquarters.
After taking that evidence back to the station, Lieutenant Gallagher and Detective Lank go back out to 34 Fairview Road to interview Jennifer McCabe. For context, Jennifer McCabe is the sister of the owner of the house. So 34 Fairview Road is owned by Brian and Nicole Albert, and Jennifer is Nicole's sister. Jennifer is also the woman that invited John and Karen to the party the night before John was found. And Jennifer is also the woman that Karen called when she woke up and realized John was not home. So Gallagher and Lank go back to 34 Fairview Road with the intention to talk to Jennifer McCabe.
At some point, did you return to Fairview Road that morning?
I did. I accompanied Detective Sergeant Lank. We went into a side door, and there were people in the kitchen at that time. Who I remember specific was Jen McCabe, who I don't know personally, but I know because that's who Sergeant Lank arrived to talk to, and I knew Brian Albert. He was Boston police officer, yes.
Are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Brian Higgins?
He is an ATF agent who I've worked with when I was assigned to DEA, and he later had a satellite office at our PD, and I have since come to know him personally.
Mr. Higgins, was he present in the home on Fairview when you arrived there that morning?
I don't recall him. When I arrived originally, definitely not. I don't recall if he was there when we arrived about 9 a.m.
Jumping in for context, as he just described, Brian Higgins is an ATF agent, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and he has a satellite office at the Canton Police Station. He also was at the 34 Fairview Road the night before John O'Keefe was found in front of that house. That part hasn't been told to the jury yet, but I'm telling y'all, so just keep it in mind. Now, cross-examination from Karen's defense team. And first, her attorney addresses any connections between the officers that arrived on scene and the Alberts.
I told Detective Sergeant Lake, make sure he has initial statements from everybody present.
Does that mean the people inside the house?
Yes.
At the time that you tasked Sergeant Lank with this responsibility, did you know that you were standing on the property of Brian Albert?
I did.
Did you also know that Sergeant Lank had an ongoing and a long-time relationship with the Albert family?
I know he knew them. I think you're mischaracterizing the relationship.
Did you see a problem with having somebody who knew the parties taking the initial statements from those parties?
Not at all, Sergeant Lank, no issue at all.
And then he gets into that method that was used for processing the scene, as well as some other stuff, including how the taillight of Karen's SUV was apparently broken when it was at the police station. Just watch.
Temporary evidence containers to collect that blood, correct?
Yep, we utilized cups, plastic cups.
Those were red Solo cups, right?
That's correct.
The same kind of red Solo cup you drink beer out of at a barbecue?
Sure, you could.
And where did you get those red Solo cups?
We got them from Lieutenant Gallagher.
So in other words, you got, to use your words, the evidence containers from a neighbor
Correct.
from 34 Fairview to Kenton PD. Give me an idea.
Mile and a half.
4 minutes, 5 minutes, is that right, to drive?
Sure.
You didn't go back to Kenton PD to get actual evidence containers, correct?
We wouldn't have temporary plastic containers that what we were looking for. We're looking to take samples of snow. We wouldn't have had, I know for a fact we did not have those.
If you find a broken glass on somebody's yard in a situation like this, did that seem out of place to you?
They were coming from a bar. It didn't seem totally out of place, no.
Did you ever go inside the house to search for the other part of the glass?
Absolutely not.
Because you made up your mind initially where that glass came from.
No,
Did you search the house for any other matching glasses?
no,
Matter of fact, you didn't search the house for any physical items, did you?
of course not.
Is that because that house belonged to a Boston police officer?
No, it's because it requires probable causes, which we did not have.
Other than Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe, there were 3 or 4 other people in the house. Were those 3 or 4 other people in the house at the time that John O'Keefe was found dead or dying on the lawn?
I don't have the answer to that.
Did you think that might have been an important thing to find out?
Again, I didn't think of that at that time, and I didn't think it was important at that time. No, I don't recall Brian Higgins being there.
Okay.
I don't recall who the other people were at that time.
But Brian Higgins was not one of them.
I don't know the answer to that. He could have been.
As a matter of fact, you've got a social relationship with Brian Higgins as well.
I have been social with Brian Higgins, yes.
So you know him professionally and socially. You can't tell the jurors whether or not he was in that home when you went back over there to interview individuals about a Boston police officer who had fallen and was either dead or dying on the front lawn.
I can't answer that question.
Did you or Sergeant Lank separate the witnesses before they were interviewed?
There was only one witness he was interviewing,
Who was that?
Jen McCabe.
Where was everybody else in the house?
I believe they were all in the same area, the kitchen. I believe it was the kitchen.
Those individuals were not taken to a different part of the house.
Not that I'm aware, no.
And I think you already answered this, but I'm going to ask it just to make sure I'm clear. None of that interview of Jen McCabe was not recorded in any way, audio or video recorded.
Correct.
Who made the decision to even remove the taillight? Was that Canton PD or was it Massachusetts State Police?
That would have been somebody within the state police.
And then you contacted Officer Wanless to actually facilitate the removal of that light. And during the course of the removal of that light, a taillight was broken, correct?
That's correct.
And shattered.
Yes.
So now we do have evidence that that taillight, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, was broken or broken more once it was inside the Sallyport in Canton PD's custody.
Next up to testify is Detective Sean Good. Now, Sean had been working an overnight shift at the police station leading into the morning that John O'Keefe's body was found in front of 34 Fairview Road. Do y'all have the address memorized yet?
Through your work with the Canton Police Department, you familiar with an individual by the name of Brian Higgins?
Yes. He has his own scan card. He doesn't have to check in with myself or anybody. I remember at one point during the evening, he came in. I don't remember if he came into the dispatch or if I just saw him on one of the numerous monitors we have in dispatch. We never talked or anything like that. Didn't think anything of it. It's not uncommon. I believe it was probably 1:30. Again, I wasn't looking at a clock to see.
Since Sean Good was working dispatch, he encountered the call that Carrie Roberts made around 5 a.m. asking if any officers had arrested or run into John O'Keefe. More context, when Karen woke up and realized that John O'Keefe wasn't home, she called Jennifer McCabe, who we already talked about, and she also called Carrie Roberts.
She doesn't know where he is. You didn't touch that O'Keefe, did you?
John O'Keefe.
Yeah, he's about to cop and will be on set, so.
No. Yeah, no, we didn't lock anybody out or anything like that.
All right, well, thank you.
And then around 6 a.m. when John's body is discovered by Karen, Carrie, and Jen in front of 34 Fairview Road, Jen McCabe is the one who called the police.
There's a guy on the truck in the snow. Just for the Albert resident. Yeah, I just pulled up the house. No, I think he's passed away. I know, I'm not home with the ambulance. I know.
You could hear me. I ended up dispatching my own officers, and then I had one other cruiser come back to the station so I could get down there. So I phoned Lieutenant Gallagher and Detective Sergeant Lank. Just policy. Lieutenant Gallagher was the off-going lieutenant the night prior, the shift prior, so that's what you usually do. And Detective Sergeant Lang is in charge of the detectives.
And then cross.
Sergeant Good, you grew up in Canton?
I did.
You attended Canton Public Schools? So it is fair to say that you graduated high school with Michael Proctor's sister and Christopher Albert's sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
Working for 18 years as a Canton police officer, you're well familiar with the Albert family of Canton, correct?
I work with one of them.
You know that the Albert family is a well-known family in Canton. Christopher Albert is a Canton town selectman, and you've already established that Kevin Albert is a Canton police officer. Testified that you knew Brian Albert as well, and you knew that he was a Boston police officer who lived in Canton. Now, as of January 28th of 2022, who among the Albert family did you know either personally or professionally?
Professionally is Kevin Albert.
Okay, what about personally?
I knew Chris.
On January 29th of 2022, you learned at approximately 6 a.m. that John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's front lawn, correct?
Yes.
And as of January 29th of 2022, you knew that Brian Albert at that time, of course, was the brother of your fellow Canton police officer, Kevin Albert, correct?
Yes.
Have you known Kevin Albert for?
As long as I worked at the Camp Police Department.
And that is approximately 18 years?
Coming up in 18 years, yes.
And because he is a fellow Canton police officer, you'd expect that he would have your back in a crisis, correct?
I hope he would defend me while working. Yes, he's a police officer.
You said there's a brotherhood among police officers, correct?
To a fact.
And it's reinforced over the years by superior officers and your colleagues, correct?
Sure.
You were on duty, correct?
Yes.
What was your shift?
My shift was I stayed inside.
When you're handling dispatch, you're not expected to leave the station and physically respond to calls that come in, correct?
Anything within reason that a supervisor should go, I'm leaving the station.
Say yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you. Was it unusual to see Brian Higgins come into the station at 1:30 a.m. on a weekend?
No.
Let's skip ahead a few hours later. Decided it would be a good thing for you to go to the call personally, correct?
Yes.
Responding to the call wasn't your duty assignment, but you made it your duty assignment, correct?
Correct.
After that, you personally called two of your other colleagues who were not on duty that night to respond with you to Brian Albert's house, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you previously testified, I believe, that Sergeant Michael Lank was one of those officers, and he arrived at 6:25 a.m., correct?
Correct.
And then Lieutenant Paul Gallagher was the other officer, and he arrived closer to 7 a.m., correct?
Yes.
And when you got there, you knew you were outside the home of Boston officer Brian Albert, correct?
Yes.
And at some point after you arrived, you saw both Sergeant Lank and Detective Gallagher arrive, correct?
Yes.
It was Sergeant Lank who first entered the home and made initial contact with Brian Albert and his family?
No, I was right next to him.
So is it your testimony that the first time the police went in the house, you were there with Sergeant Lank?
Yes.
All right. With regard to your police report, your report clearly listed persons involved in these, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that with regard to all of the persons involved listed in your police report, everybody's first name and last name was completely spelled out except for one? Who was that?
Brian Albert.
Did you omit Brian Albert's first name to mask the fact that he was involved?
No. No.
Do you know who Colin Albert is?
I know that he is Chris Albert's son.
And so therefore he's Brian Albert's nephew?
Yes.
Anywhere in your report do you mention Colin Albert was present at 34 Fairview the night of January 28th going into January 29th?
No.
This report also lists home addresses for everyone in the persons involved section except for one person?
Brian Higgins.
His home address was not listed on there, correct?
Correct.
And what address was listed for Brian Higgins?
1492 Washington Street. It's the town of Canton.
It's the Town of Canton Police Department, correct?
Correct.
Brian Higgins was not an involved person because he was an investigator on the case, correct?
Correct.
He was not involved in this case in an official capacity, correct?
Correct.
You were, right?
Yes.
So listing the Canton Police Department as Sergeant Sean Good's address would be appropriate. Would you agree?
Yes.
Why was Brian Higgins' address listed at the Canton Police Department?
I don't know.
But that is something that you kept in your report, correct?
Correct.
All right, I know I'm behind, so let me go catch up on day 6 and 7 so I can give those recaps tomorrow.